Hi guys. In this video we're going to talk about using high-pass filtering in transitions. High-pass filtering, usually combined with volume automation, is going to be your number one tool for making great transitions. So what makes them so useful? Let's back up a bit and talk about how the audience perceives the dance floor journey. The dance floor loves taking steps forward into higher and higher intensity. It doesn't like taking steps back. But how is this possible? If a clubber goes and spends 4 hours in a nightclub, they're going to hear somewhere between 700 and 1,000 8-bar loops. If that's the case, how can each one be bigger than the last? Well, dance music is put together in a way by producers that tricks the audience into thinking that things are always getting bigger and more exciting. When things drop down, such as when we drop into a breakdown or an outro, it happens with such excitement that it still feels like a momentous occasion. Once we drop into a breakdown, it doesn't take long before things start to feel like they're going somewhere again. One of the things that the audience likes the most is hearing something new, and so long as we give them a new experience every 8 bars, we can keep them excited. High-pass filtering allows us to remove current elements without it sounding like they're losing their intensity. As the frequency of the high-pass filter slowly rises up, the element that's getting removed has its bass frequencies slowly filtered out. The music's presence and foundation will seem to disappear ever so slowly, but because the high frequencies are still allowed to come through the filter at high volume, it still feels like the music packs a fair bit of intensity. As the foundation of the first element is high-passed out, the new element is there to take its place. This combination of keeping the intensity going while transitioning the responsibilities of the rhythm, energy, and foundation from the old piece of music to the new creates enough excitement that the listener perceives a smooth transition without feeling cheated energy-wise. To get into this more, let's go back to one of our previous examples and see what it would sound like if we used low-pass filtering to exit an element. It doesn't sound particularly powerful. In fact, it sounds like the energy's getting lower as it gets filtered out. Let's try this transition with some simple volume automation instead, basically fading one into the other. It's not too bad, but it seems to lack a bit of intensity in the middle. Also, because it's a direct fade, there's really no breakdown feeling left by the end of the build. This makes the two songs feel a bit disjointed from each other. Let's go back to how it was when the first element was high-passed out and play that element on its own so that you can hear what it's doing. You can hear that it still maintains excitement all the way until the end. From there, we allow volume automation to bring the second element in underneath. Apart from the fact that both tracks are trying to play a little vocal snippet right before the kick-in, this transition works because the breakdown is allowed to carry some of its feeling all the way till the end, including the intensity of it. And at the same time, the main track's drums play from a fairly consistent volume from the start and just creep up a bit with volume automation. It sounds a little bit less like a DJ crossfading between two songs, and more like it's one song. There's a few more things we could do to get this moment totally nailed, but this is pretty good for now. Because both songs are allowed to carry some of their elements through the 8 bars, and there's not too much overwhelming bass presence, you can see the power of a high-pass filter when transitioning between two tracks, particularly towards the end of a breakdown in your mashup. Now, I want to show you a couple more things that we can do to this transition to make it even better. Firstly, let's listen to what it sounds like if we do a straight transition and there's no reintroduction of the breakdown vocal at the end. Well, that vocal stab sounds pretty cool, but I think the mashup would blend much better as a whole if we could have the final chorus line from the breakdown in there just before the kick-in. Well, right now it's still being lost because of all the high-pass filtering. So I guess even though the high-pass filtering sounds pretty good while it's filtering up through the 8, we need to back it off a little bit just to get that vocal in there. But there's two problems with this. Firstly, the vocal is being cut off as it goes into the drop, so we'd actually have to extend the clip so that that vocal can continue to play. And secondly, there's another vocal playing all over the top of it. Let's deal with the cut off vocal first. Okay, so that sounds terrible because the bottom end from the break track is playing right over the top of the bottom end from the main track. So if we're going to try and get that vocal in there, we're going to have to try and carve out everything else. Let's forget about that for a second and try and address that main track's vocal stab coming in over the top of our vocal. Rather than fading it off completely, let's try and use a high-pass filter to cut some of it out. With all the other high-pass filtering that's currently going on in this build, it shouldn't be too noticeable. Getting back to our bass overload problem, let's use a bass shelf to pull down all the bottom end of the break track as it kicks in. Hopefully the ear won't be able to notice much of the instrumental, and it can focus on that final vocal hook. We also make sure that the break track fades off as the vocal diminishes. It's sounding better, but there's still not enough of that final hook coming in before the drop. Too much of it is currently filtered out, so we'll back off the high-pass filtering a little bit more. We'll bring the filter level up during the drop to help our bass fader a little bit. That's sounding much more manageable. Now that we've made some changes to both elements individually, let's have a listen to how they're behaving together. You can notice quite a bit of the breakdown synth coming back in awkwardly towards the end of the break, so we need to get rid of that. Rather than using our high-pass filter to try and take care of it, which is quite overt, we'll instead use our bass shelf and slowly roll it off over the 8. That's starting to sound a lot more smooth. You can hear some quite noticeable, kind of ugly sounding high-pass filtering on the main track. It's actually drawing more attention to itself rather than ducking under the vocal from the break. We want this part to actually duck right under and let the final vocal line from the break come out. So let's try using volume automation to temporarily pull the level of the track down, just for those couple of beats. Sounding better, but we still need that vocal to push through a bit more, so we'll turn it up a little, just for the duration of the hook. The transition's sounding pretty good now. There's plenty of energy throughout the 8. We use the final hook from the break as a way to really tie the mashup together. and the transition feels smooth without dropping any energy. It's starting to sound like the two pieces of music are one. I want to show you one more thing with filtering. When we set up the template, you might remember that we talked about the fact that sometimes when filters make a really sudden jump in frequency, they can cause huge problems at the master. I'll show you an example of this. The high-pass filter automation you can see here is exactly what I was talking about. So you might be wondering why it's not creating any problems. Here's the reason. I've actually got the filter switching on at the start of the 8-bar build and then switching off at the drop. That means that I can do anything I want with it and it won't cause problems. Have a look at what happens if I leave the filter running the whole time and then try to make a sudden filter drop. The filter drop is sending a huge low-frequency pulse out of the plugin. When it hits the master, it causes the limiter to crush down the level. So, to get around this, I switch off the filter at the point that I want to drop the frequency back down. Then the frequency can do whatever it likes. Any crazy noises it's making inside the plugin won't make it to the master because the plugin is bypassed. It's nothing to do with Live's autofilter, it's just something that you need to be careful of with all filters. In the next video, we'll look at added builds and samples, and how they can improve your transitions and make up for lost energy. Thanks for watching!